The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 47 different species gathered in the massive crystalline dome orbiting the neutral world of Kepler Prime. Ambassador Zethkri of the Altarian Empire adjusted his breathing apparatus, his 4 eyes scanning the assembly with growing concern. The emergency session had been called after the devastating defeat at the Outer Rim colonies, where the mechanical horrors known as the Devourers had consumed 3 entire star systems in less than a solar cycle. Fellow beings, Zethkri's voice resonated through the translation matrix, reaching every species in their native tongue. We face extinction. The Devourer swarms have broken through our defensive lines at sectors 7 through 12. Our combined fleets, representing the finest military minds in the galaxy, have been reduced to scrap metal and organic matter. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. The Devourers were not like any enemy they had faced before. These mechanical parasites consumed everything in their path, converting organic and inorganic material into more of their kind. They showed no interest in negotiation, displayed no recognizable intelligence beyond their hunger for resources, and seemed to reproduce at an exponential rate that defied all known physics. The Kethmoran battlecruisers, pride of our fleet, continued Admiral Visas Tang of the reptilian Kethmora, his scales rippling with distress. Gone. In minutes. They swarmed our ships like insects on a corpse. Our weapons barely scratched their hulls before they tore us apart with precision that speaks to a hive intelligence we cannot comprehend. Dr. Nelthara of the peaceful Sindari raised one of her 6 arms. Our research indicates the Devourers have been dormant in the dark space between galaxies for millions of cycles. Something has awakened them, drawn them to our galaxy. Our mathematical models suggest they will consume every system within 50 standard years. The weight of that statement settled over the assembly like a funeral shroud. 50 years to save a galaxy containing trillions of sentient beings across thousands of worlds. The mathematics were brutal and unforgiving. We need warriors, declared General Korthak of the warrior caste Brakthari, his voice a thunderous boom that made several smaller species flinch. Not diplomats, not scientists, not philosophers. Warriors who know how to kill and die for something greater than themselves. With respect, General, interjected Ambassador Yilnara of the technologically advanced hegemony, we have warriors. The finest the galaxy has produced. They have all fallen before these mechanical monstrosities. Perhaps we need a different approach. What we need, said a new voice from the observer's gallery, is someone who has never known peace. Every head turned toward the speaker. Ambassador Chen Wei of the Terran Federation stood slowly, her simple gray uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate clothing and natural features of the other species. Humans had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel and had been granted observer status in the Galactic Council just 5 years prior. Most species considered them primitive, barely evolved beyond their tribal warfare phase. Ambassador Chen, Zethkri's tone carried polite dismissal. While we appreciate Terra's enthusiasm for joining this conflict, your species lacks the technological advancement necessary for— You want warriors, Chen interrupted, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the chamber. You've been looking for soldiers, for honorable fighters who follow rules and conduct warfare with dignity. That's not what you need. Lovin, Rever, this. She stepped down from the observers section, her boots clicking against the crystalline floor. On my world, we have a saying, if you want peace, prepare for war. But there's another saying that's older, darker. War is hell. You've been fighting a war, trying to preserve your honor and your civilization's values. The Devourers aren't fighting a war. They're conducting an extermination. The chamber fell silent. Chen's words carried a weight that made even the massive Brakthari uncomfortable. The galaxy has enjoyed peace for 3,000 years, Chen continued. Your species have evolved beyond the need for the darker aspects of conflict. You've forgotten what it means to face total annihilation. On Terra, we remember. We remember because we've never stopped facing it. Admiral Visistang leaned forward. Explain. Chen activated a holographic display from her personal device, unauthorized but tolerated given the circumstances. Images filled the air above the assembly. Ancient battles, modern warfare, weapons of mass destruction, and the scarred landscapes they left behind. While your species learned to cooperate, humans spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other. We've fought wars over resources, territory, ideology, religion, and sometimes just because we couldn't find anything else to fight about. We've built weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering, developed tactics meant to terrorize as much as defeat, and created doctrines of warfare that prioritize victory over honor. The images shifted, showing human military technology. Compared to galactic standards, it appeared primitive, brutal, and disturbingly practical. Your weapons are designed to disable ships so crews can surrender with honor, Chen said. Our weapons are designed to kill everything inside a ship so thoroughly that surrender becomes impossible. You develop shields to protect against energy weapons. We develop weapons that ignore shields entirely because protection is an obstacle to elimination. Dr. Nelthara's research tendrils twitched nervously. But surely your species has moved beyond such barbarism? Juan, Chen's smile was cold. Ambassador, 3 months ago, the Terran Defense Force conducted war games against our own colonial settlements. The scenario was defense against an overwhelming alien invasion with no possibility of surrender or negotiation. Do you know what the outcome was? OC. The chamber waited. Total victory through acceptable losses. We planned for the complete destruction of our own colonies if it meant stopping the invaders. We calculated how many of our own civilians we could sacrifice to maintain strategic advantage. We designed weapons that could sterilize entire continents if necessary. Chen paused, letting the implications sink in. That's the difference between you and us. You fight to preserve civilization. We fight to preserve our species, even if it means destroying everything we've built. General Korthok stood, his massive frame towering over the human ambassador. You speak of tactics without honor, of victory through atrocity. What makes you think such methods would succeed where honor has failed? Because, Chen replied, meeting his gaze without flinching, the Devourers aren't fighting with honor either. They're fighting for survival and expansion, pure and simple. The only way to defeat something that exists solely to consume is to become something that exists solely to destroy. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed tactical analyses of Devourer behavior patterns. Your fleets engage them in open battle, ship to ship, fleet to fleet. You're fighting their strength. We would attack their weaknesses. You target their combat units. We would target their reproduction facilities. You try to minimize collateral damage. We would turn collateral damage into a weapon. Explain, demanded Admiral Vistang, his earlier dismissal replaced by professional interest. The Devourers convert matter into more Devourers. What happens if the matter they convert is inherently unstable? What happens if we feed them materials that cause their own production systems to malfunction? What happens if we make every planet they consume into a trap instead of a meal? The chamber erupted in discussion. The concept was simultaneously brilliant and horrifying. Several species representatives expressed immediate revulsion at the idea of deliberately contaminating their own worlds, even to deny them to an enemy. The logistics alone, protested Minister Kavnel of the Commerce Guild. The cost in lives, in resources, in everything, Chen agreed. It would cost everything. Every world between the Devour Advance and the Galactic Core would have to be sacrificed. Every civilian population would have to be evacuated or left behind as part of the trap. Every natural resource would have to be poisoned against future use. It would be the most comprehensive scorched earth campaign in galactic history. That's monstrous, whispered Ambassador Yilnara. Yes, Chen said simply. It is. But it would work. Humans have been developing monstrous solutions to impossible problems for millennia. When faced with extinction, we don't preserve our honor. We preserve our existence. And we rebuild honor, later, if we survive. Zethkri found his voice. And if your species is wrong? If this strategy fails? Chen shrugged. Then everyone dies anyway. But at least the Devourers will have spent more resources and time consuming a galaxy that fought them with every dirty trick, psychological weapon, and war crime in the book. Maybe the next galaxy they encounter will have learned from our example. The brutal pragmatism of her statement left the assembly speechless. Here was a species that calculated victory in terms of making their own destruction as expensive as possible for the enemy. You're asking us to abandon everything we've become, said Dr. Nelthara. No, Chen corrected. I'm asking you to let us do what we've always been. You wanted warriors. You got them. Warriors fight with honor, follow rules, and try to preserve what they're fighting for. You need a species that can look at the complete destruction of galactic civilization and see it as an acceptable price for victory. You need humans. The vote, when it finally came, was close. 24 species voted in favor of granting humanity emergency military authority. 23 voted against or abstained. It was enough. As the assembly dispersed, Ambassador Chen remained in the chamber, staring out at the stars through the crystalline dome. General Korthok approached her, his heavy footsteps echoing in the empty space. I voted for your proposal, he said quietly. But I want you to understand something, human. If your species saves this galaxy through the methods you've described, you will be remembered as saviors, but you will also be feared. No species will ever again see humanity as anything other than a weapon pointed at the universe. Chen nodded. General, my species has been preparing for that reputation our entire evolutionary history. We've never been the good guys. We've just been very, very good at staying alive. 6 months later, the first human ships began arriving in the contested sectors. They were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Vessels designed not for exploration or even warfare, but for systematic extermination. Their crews came not as liberators or defenders, but as exterminators hired to solve a pest problem. The Devourers were about to learn that while the galaxy had produced warriors, Terra had produced something far more dangerous. Humans who had spent 10,000 years learning how to make war into a science, death into an art, and extinction into just another problem requiring a practical solution. The galaxy had asked for warriors. Humanity was about to show them the difference between fighting for honor and fighting for survival. The difference between soldiers and executioners. Commander Sarah Martinez stood on the bridge of the TDS Nemesis, watching through the viewport as her ship approached the Devourer-infested Kepler 442 system. The tactical display showed what remained of what had once been a thriving colony world with 12 million inhabitants. Now it was a skeletal framework of metal and harvested matter, completely converted into a Devourer production facility. Contact ahead, reported Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka from the sensor station. Devourer patrol swarm, approximately 40 units. They're moving to intercept. Perfect, Martinez replied, her voice carrying the calm satisfaction of a predator spotting prey. Signal the fleet. Execute Broken Arrow protocol. Behind her, the bridge crew moved with the practiced efficiency of humans who had trained for this moment their entire careers. Unlike the mixed species crews common in galactic fleets, the Nemesis was crewed entirely by humans. The Galactic Council had learned quickly that human tactical doctrines required a level of coordination and moral flexibility that other species found disturbing. Fleet acknowledging, reported Communications Officer David Park. 16 ships ready for synchronized detonation. Estimated Devourer casualties. Total system elimination. The plan was simple in its brutality. The human fleet would appear to engage the Devourer swarms in conventional battle, drawing them into close-quarters combat. Then, instead of fighting, Every human ship would simultaneously detonate their quantum cores, creating a chain reaction that would sterilize the entire system. No prisoners, no survivors, no retreat. Just mutual annihilation on a scale that turned warfare into an exercise in applied physics. Admiral Chen's compliments. Park continued. Phoenix Squadron reports similar success at the Altair system. The Devourers are beginning to modify their response patterns. Martinez nodded. 3 months into the human campaign, the Devourers had begun to adapt. They were learning to recognize human ships and adjusting their tactics accordingly. They no longer sent their entire local forces to investigate human incursions. They were becoming cautious, which meant they were learning. Time for Phase 2, Martinez announced. Signal Admiral Chen. Tell her the enemy is ready for the main course. 60 light-years away, Admiral Chen Wei received the message aboard her flagship, the TDS Armageddon. She stood in the ship's war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the current state of the Devourer advance. Red markers indicated systems under Devourer control. Blue markers showed remaining galactic settlements. The red was winning. Outstanding, Chen said to her assembled staff. The Devourers have learned that human ships explode. Now we teach them that everything human explodes. Major General Robert Harrison, the grizzled veteran commanding human ground forces, looked up from his tactical pad. Admiral? Are you sure the Council approved Operation Scorched Galaxy? The biological warfare components alone violate 17 interspecies treaties. Chen's expression didn't change. General, the Council gave us emergency authority to prosecute this war using any means necessary. They didn't want to know the details. They just wanted results. Are you developing conscience issues? Harrison laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Ma'am, I'm just making sure we're all on the same page. When this is over, assuming anyone's left to write the history books, they're going to call us monsters. Good, Chen replied. Monsters win wars. Heroes get statues after they're dead. Signal Fleet Command. Begin implementation of the Thanatos Gambit. The Thanatos Gambit had been developed by human military strategists, working in collaboration with the darkest corners of human scientific research. It was a campaign strategy that would have been considered a war crime if applied to any sentient species. Applied to the Devourers, it was simply an extermination protocol. Phase 1 had been the suicide attacks, designed to teach the Devourers that human ships were dangerous to approach. Phase 2 was the deployment of contaminated materials throughout the contested systems. Every human ship that engaged Devourer forces would deliberately lose the engagement, allowing their cargo to be consumed by the enemy. That cargo contained specially designed nanomachines that would integrate into Devourer production systems and begin subtle sabotage from within. Phase 3 would be the systematic contamination of entire star systems with self-replicating materials designed to be irresistibly attractive to Devourer consumption, but lethal to their reproduction processes. Worlds would be seeded with what appeared to be rich sources of metals and energy, but which contained molecular-level time bombs that would trigger cascading failures in Devourer manufacturing. Dr. Elizabeth Zhao, the human xenobiologist who had developed much of the contamination technology, joined the briefing via hologram from her research station. Admiral, the initial dispersal results are promising. The nanomachine integration rate among captured Devourer units is approaching 90%. They're not recognizing our infiltration systems as hostile. Because they're not, Chen replied. They're designed to be helpful right up until the moment they're not. How's the psychological warfare component developing? Dr. Zhao's expression grew troubled. That's more complicated. The Devourers appear to have some form of collective intelligence, but it's unlike anything we've encountered. They process information through consumption patterns rather than traditional neural networks. However, we've identified what might be analogous to trauma responses. The room grew quiet. The idea that the Devourers could experience something like trauma opened disturbing possibilities. Explain, Chen ordered. When Devourer units encounter scenarios where consumption leads to immediate, total destruction of their local collective, they begin exhibiting avoidance behaviors. They're developing what we might call PTSD. Fear of consumption events that result in total local extinction. Major General Harrison leaned forward. Can we weaponize that? We already are, Dr. Zhao admitted. Operation Pavlov involves creating consumption scenarios that appear beneficial, but result in catastrophic feedback loops. We're training them to fear their own nature. It's extraordinarily cruel, even by human standards. Chen considered this. Doctor, in your professional opinion, are the devourers sentient? Yes, Admiral. Collectively, absolutely. They experience something analogous to curiosity, frustration, even what might be called grief, when major segments of their collective are destroyed. Good, Chen said. That means they can suffer. That means we can break them psychologically, as well as physically. Continue the operation. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the other species were beginning to understand what they had unleashed. Ambassador Zethkri stood in his private chambers aboard the Council station, reviewing reports from the human theater of operations with growing horror. The tactical reports were clinical in their brutality. Human forces didn't engage in battle. They engaged in systematic extermination. They didn't capture territory. They sterilized it. They didn't fight for victory. They fought to ensure that defeat was so costly that the enemy would eventually exhaust itself on their resistance. My lord, his aide, Sub-Ambassador Kelmar, entered with the latest intelligence briefing. The humans have. They've done something to the Vega system. Zethkri activated the holographic display. What he saw defied comprehension. The Vega system, which had been completely overrun by devourers 6 months ago, was now empty. Not destroyed, not consumed, not conquered. Empty. The devourers had simply left. How is this possible? The human forces seeded the system with what they're calling cognitive hazards, Kelmar explained. Specifically designed materials that cause devourer collective intelligence to experience something equivalent to madness. The devourers consumed the material, integrated it into their collective consciousness, and then evacuated the entire system. Rather than continue to exist in that space, they drove them insane. Zethkri whispered. They created a weapon that attacks the mind. Sir, there's more. The humans are reporting that the contaminated devourer collectives appear to be spreading the psychological contamination to other devourer groups they encounter. It's becoming viral. The humans have created a plague that attacks sanity itself. Zethkri sank into his meditation alcove. What have we done? We asked them to save civilization, and they're destroying the very concept of war itself. Back in human space, Admiral Chen received word that the Galactic Council was requesting a status briefing. She laughed, the sound echoing in her empty ready room. Signal the Council, she told her communication officer. Tell them we'll provide a briefing when the war is over. Until then, they specifically requested that we use any means necessary. We're doing exactly that. Commander Martinez, now commanding the human forces in the Outer Rim, stood on the bridge of her new flagship, the TDS extinction event. Through the viewport, she could see a devourer fleet in full retreat from a system they had been consuming for months. The retreat wasn't tactical. It was panicked. Ma'am, reported her tactical officer. The devourer swarms are exhibiting what can only be described as terror behaviors. They're abandoning resource-rich systems rather than risk exposure to human contamination protocols. Outstanding, Martinez replied. Signal Admiral Chen. Tell her the devourers are afraid of us now. Phase 4 can begin. Phase 4 was the most ambitious part of human strategy. With the devourers now actively avoiding systems that might contain human contamination, humanity would begin the systematic evacuation and militarization of every world in the galaxy, not to defend them, but to turn them into weapons. Every planet would become a trap. Every asteroid would become a bomb. Every space station would become a suicide weapon designed to take as many devourers as possible into oblivion. The humans weren't just fighting a war. They were turning the entire galaxy into a weapon pointed at the devourer collective consciousness. Dr. Zhao's latest psychological warfare experiments had proven that the devourers could experience not just fear, but despair. They could be taught to see their own existence as futile, their expansion as pointless, their consumption as ultimately self-defeating. "We're not just killing them," Chen explained to her senior staff during their latest strategic briefing. "We're convincing them to kill themselves. We're making them afraid to eat, afraid to reproduce, afraid to exist. We're turning their greatest strength, their hunger, into their greatest weakness." The galaxy had wanted warriors. Humanity had delivered something far more terrifying. A species that could turn existence itself into a weapon, that could make survival so costly that extinction became preferable. They had created warfare beyond war, conflict beyond conflict. The devourers were about to learn that, while they were very good at consuming galaxies, humans were far better at making sure that consumption came with a price that no species, no matter how advanced or determined, could afford to pay. The executioners had arrived, and they were just getting started. 2 years after the human campaign began, the Galactic Council Chamber was a very different place. Where once 47 species had gathered in democratic assembly, now only 23 representatives remained. Some species had been consumed by the advancing devourers before human intervention could save them. Others had voluntarily evacuated to distant galaxies rather than witness what humanity was doing to win the war. Ambassador Zethkri stood before a tactical display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Green sectors indicated human-controlled space, which now encompassed nearly 40% of previously contested territory. Red sectors showed active devourer presence, reduced to less than 15% of their peak expansion. The remaining space was marked in yellow, contested zones where something unprecedented was occurring. "The devourers are retreating," Admiral Chen reported via hologram from her command ship. "Not just tactical withdrawal, full-scale abandonment of entire sectors. Our psychological warfare protocols have achieved cascade effectiveness beyond our most optimistic projections." Dr. Nelthara of the Sindari raised one of her remaining arms. She had lost 2 in a devourer attack before human forces arrived at her homeworld. "Admiral Chen, our scientists have analyzed the wreckage from recent devourer retreats. The mechanical units show signs of self-inflicted damage, internal systems deliberately disabled, production matrices shut down, even what appears to be ritualistic destruction of their own collective memory cores." Chen's expression showed grim satisfaction. "Confirmed, Doctor. The contamination has spread beyond physical systems into their collective consciousness. They're experiencing what human psychologists would classify as species-wide clinical depression, accompanied by suicidal ideation." "You've driven an entire galactic threat to the equivalent of madness," whispered Ambassador Yilnara. "How is that even possible?" Quote, "Simple," Chen replied. "We made existence more painful than extinction. Every system they consume now carries cognitive hazards designed to create feedback loops in their collective intelligence. Every resource they acquire makes them doubt the value of acquisition. Every successful reproduction event carries information that makes them question the point of reproduction." She gestured to her tactical officer, who displayed a series of captured, devourer communications, mathematical patterns that the human xenolinguistics team had partially decoded. "These are their internal communications over the past 6 months," Chen explained. "The translation is approximate, but the meaning is clear. They're asking themselves why they exist. They're questioning the value of consumption. They're experiencing what humans would recognize as existential crisis on a species level." General Korthok of the Brakthari, now missing his left arm and bearing extensive scarring from a desperate last stand at his homeworld, spoke in a voice heavy with fatigue. "Admiral, my people have a tradition of honoring worthy enemies. The devourers were a threat that demanded respect, even in their monstrosity. What you've done. This isn't defeating an enemy. This is destroying the concept of enemyhood itself. Chen nodded. General, that was always the objective. The Devourers weren't just a military threat, they were an existential one. You can't defeat an existential threat with conventional tactics. You have to attack the existence itself. Commander Martinez, now promoted to Admiral and commanding the entire Outer Rim Theater, appeared on a secondary display. Council members, you should know that the psychological contamination appears to be spreading to Devourer collectives beyond our immediate operational area. We're receiving reports of spontaneous Devourer retreat from sectors we've never even approached. They're apparently communicating our cognitive hazards to their entire species network. You've created a plague of despair, Doctor, Nelthara said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and horror. A contagious form of nihilism that spreads through their collective consciousness faster than their reproduction can compensate for. Exactly, Chen confirmed. But that's not the most interesting development. Admiral Martinez, report on the anomalous contact protocols. Martinez activated her own tactical display. 3 weeks ago, human forces in the Centauri sector received an unprecedented communication. The Devourers surrendered. Not tactically, not strategically. Existentially. They want to negotiate terms for their own extinction. The chamber fell silent. The concept was so far beyond their experience that most species representatives couldn't immediately process it. Explain, demanded Zethkri. The local Devourer collective sent a mathematical communication that our xenolinguistics team has translated as follows. We acknowledge the futility of consumption. We request assistance in achieving efficient termination. We offer complete cessation of reproductive and expansion activities in exchange for minimally traumatic elimination protocols. The 7. We, end quote. End quote. We, end quote. Ambassador Yilnara stood slowly. They're asking you to help them commit suicide? Species-wide assisted extinction, Martinez confirmed. They've concluded that existence itself is a net negative, and they lack the capacity to terminate their own collective without external assistance. They want us to design a humane method for eliminating their entire species. Dr. Zhao appeared on another channel, broadcasting from her research station. Council members, I've been analyzing the psychological profiles we've developed of Devourer collective intelligence. The cognitive hazards we've deployed have created what can only be described as a crisis of meaning. They no longer understand why they exist, or what purpose their existence serves. We've convinced them that consciousness is suffering, Chen added. That awareness is inherently painful. That existence without purpose is worse than non-existence. They want to stop existing, but their programming won't allow self-termination. So they're asking their enemies, us, to do it for them. General Harrison, appearing from his ground forces command, provided additional context. It's not just the Devourers in active combat zones. We're detecting similar communications from Devourer collectives that haven't encountered human forces for months. The psychological contamination is spreading faster than their physical networks can contain it. How many? Asked Zethkri quietly. Preliminary estimates suggest approximately 60% of total Devourer collective mass is now expressing termination requests. Doctor, Zhao replied. The remaining 40% appears to be attempting quarantine protocols, trying to isolate themselves from the contaminated portions of their species network. Chen's expression grew thoughtful. Which brings us to the next phase of operations. The remaining Devourer collectives are now actively working to prevent the spread of our cognitive hazards within their own species. They're essentially fighting a civil war against their own psychological contamination. She activated a galaxy-wide tactical display. Current intelligence suggests the Devourer species is fragmenting. Contaminated collectives are being systematically isolated and abandoned by uncontaminated ones. They're developing what appears to be an immune response to our psychological warfare. Meaning? Asked Admiral Visistang. Meaning they're evolving countermeasures. The remaining Devourer collectives are becoming immune to despair by eliminating their capacity for self-reflection entirely. They're becoming more dangerous, not less. They're removing the parts of their consciousness that could question or doubt, leaving only pure consumption drive. The implications settled over the assembly like a heavy blanket. The human campaign had succeeded beyond all projections. But it had also created something potentially worse than the original threat. Devourers with no capacity for doubt, no possibility of psychological manipulation, and no weakness except complete physical destruction. Commander Sarah Martinez, now overseeing operations in the core systems, provided the final piece of the puzzle. Admiral Chen, we've completed analysis of the quarantined Devourer collectives. They're not just immune to psychological warfare. They're actively hostile to any form of consciousness that could harbor doubt or questioning. They appear to view sentient thought itself as a contamination vector. They're becoming anti-consciousness, Dr. Zhao confirmed. Evolution in real time toward a form of existence that cannot experience uncertainty, cannot question its purpose, cannot be infected by doubt. They're becoming perfect killing machines by eliminating every aspect of intelligence except the drive to consume. Chen stood silent for a long moment, processing the implications. So we have two problems now. 60% of the devourer species wants to die and is asking us to help them accomplish it. 40% of the species is evolving into something that views consciousness itself as an enemy to be eliminated. What's the recommendation? Asked Zethkri. We help the suicidal ones die quickly and efficiently. Chen replied without hesitation. We've already developed termination protocols that can eliminate entire devourer collectives with minimal suffering. It's actually the most humane option available. And the immune ones? Chen's smile was cold as the void between galaxies. The ones that are evolving beyond psychological warfare? We use the original human strategy. We kill them all, with overwhelming force applied precisely and without mercy. She gestured to Admiral Martinez. Admiral, initiate Operation Final Solution. All human fleets are to begin systematic extermination of non-surrendering devourer collectives. No psychological warfare, no contamination protocols, no cognitive hazards, just pure, efficient destruction using every weapon system humanity has developed. Including the experimental technologies? Martinez asked quietly. Including the planet killers, the star bombers, the quantum cascade weapons, and the temporal displacement artillery. Everything. We're not fighting a war anymore, we're completing an extermination contract. Ambassador Chen turned to address the Galactic Council directly. Honored representatives, you asked humanity to save your civilization from the devourer threat. In 18 months, that threat will be completely eliminated. Some through assisted suicide, the rest through total annihilation. The galaxy will be safe. And what happens to humanity after that? Asked General Korthak quietly. Chen considered the question carefully. General, humanity will have spent 3 years becoming something that can look at an entire galactic species and decide it needs to stop existing. We'll have developed weapons that can sterilize star systems, psychology that can drive entire species to suicide, and tactical doctrines that turn warfare into applied extinction theory. She paused, looking out at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. After this war ends, humanity will be the most dangerous species in the galaxy. We'll be the species that other species call when something absolutely, positively needs to be killed with maximum efficiency and minimum mercy. We'll be the executioners of the galaxy. That's what you wanted, she concluded. You wanted someone who could save you from extinction. We did. Klukteen very one. Aranan si. Quixt. The cost is that now you have to live in a galaxy where humanity exists as a permanent reminder that extinction is always an option, and we're very, very good at implementing it. The war ended 6 months later. The surrendering devourer collectives were efficiently terminated using human-designed dissolution protocols that converted their mechanical matrices into inert materials without suffering. The resistant devourers were hunted down and destroyed with weapons that made their original threat seem modest by comparison. When it was over, the galaxy was indeed safe. it was also fundamentally changed. The other species had learned that there were problems that could only be solved by beings willing to become monsters. They had learned that sometimes survival required doing things so terrible that only a species already comfortable with horror could accomplish them. Humanity took its place in galactic civilization not as equals, but as the things that civilized beings called when civilization itself was threatened. They were the executioners, the final option, the species that could save everyone by being willing to destroy anything. The galaxy had wanted warriors. Humanity had delivered exactly what it promised. Executioners, who could solve any problem by making it stop existing. The price of survival had been learning to live with beings who could make extinction into an art form. And humanity was very, very good at their work.